What's up, everyone? Welcome to the first episode of Rough Magic, where we explore how LMs are changing the shape of work. So, specifically, the format is to do example based demos where our guests do a screen share. So, today, hey, Ryan, you're our guest.
Hey, it's always fun to be on episode one. I feel honored and excited. Let's go.
A small personal story before we get into it. We both left our home country to move to London. I think you mentioned with your mother crying back home that wondering
Yeah.
if you'd ever return. Well, likewise here. I'm from South Africa. And yeah, it turns out that we both moved here temporarily and then fell in love and are now married with kids to a wonderful British woman.
It happens. Yeah, it's fun.
Let's get into it. We'll do a quick run through of the format. So it's really, really simple. One, quick intro from you, Ryan. And then two, we'll do a demo walkthrough of Code Factory. Really excited for that. I've seen your Twitter article. And then three, we'll wrap up with a few questions. So Ryan, if you could care to tell us who you are in about 60 seconds.
So, my name's Ryan Carson. I'm a founder, developer, dad, all of the above. I have got a computer science degree early and then decided to be a web developer and then decided I had enough of that and I wanted to start my own company. So I started my first company and have since gone on to found four companies. I just raised my seed round for my fourth. I built and sold a bunch of companies, learned a lot of lessons along the way, married an amazing British woman, had two kids. It's been a fun ride.
You've been focused on creating awesome content on Twitter, as well as sharing open source GitHub repos. You've got 4 popular repos at the moment, and they're actually coming up to about 20,000 stars.
My theory is just share what you learn as you learn it, right? Instead of like try hard to make content. So all I do is I code and I build, and then after I finish, then I talk to my agent and I say, hey, why don't you document what we just did as a markdown blog post? And then I take that, edit it, massage it, and then I post it, and people seem to like it. The hardest part about creating content is just doing it. I think now you can get over the blanks, state, the blank page state. I don't let my agents write all my content. It's really just the idea of like, let's boot up the article just so I don't have to do it. And then I do a bunch of like editing to it. But I think documenting what you do is an important thing. I recently said, though, you shouldn't build in public. You should just talk about what you learn in public, because now with agents, people can build so quickly. If you start blabbing about your startup and exactly what you're doing, then people can copy it pretty fast these days. So it's probably worth it to stay in stealth a lot longer now these days.
Okay, so without further ado, let's jump into Code Factory. And my first question would be, Ralph Wiggum, the method of coding in a bash loop to avoid context rot, coined and popularized by Jeffrey Huntley. I think around the turn of the year, it became really popular, although he originally worked on it in about June last year. So what is Code Factory and how might it differ or build on the work of Jeffrey Huntley?
Code Factory is something I blogged about on Twitter. The idea is that we're in a world now where 100% of the code that is written for your startup and 100% of the reviewing can be done by the agent. We crossed the threshold where people feel comfortable with this, I would say, late last year. I've been in that world a lot longer, and I think people who are on the cutting edge of agents have been there a lot longer. But the wider public is realizing that you can set up what we're calling code factories, where 100% of the code is written by agents, 100% of the code is reviewed by agents, and then the humans are involved at the end. OpenAI wrote about this. I'm going to click into this article really quick and make it larger for everybody. It was called Harness Engineering. And the idea is that they wanted to ship a product with 0 lines of manually written code. And so when I read this article, I thought, I want to set up this system in my repo. I had been doing pieces of it, but it wasn't deterministic and programmatic. So I set about basically adapting my code phase, my repo. You can think of it as terraforming your repo to get it into a state where an agent can write all the code and can review all the code deterministically. So I want to take a step back. So like the big takeaway here for everybody listening is that you want to figure out how to get the feedback loop working for your agent so that it can see everything that's happening, understand everything that's happening, and judge everything that's happening, and then act accordingly. And it's hard because we're used to humans doing all those things. And so a code factory is really terraforming your repo to get it in a place where the agent can see everything and understand everything and then act accordingly. So you have a coding agent write the code, right? You have the repo enforcing what I'm calling risk-aware checks. So the idea is, did you touch any code that is super risky? And then if so, then do extra checks. And then do things like browser tests, do a review cycle. I use Greptile for my review. And then eventually turn all that into PR that I can automatically check. Let me walk you through a little bit of this. I'm actually going to switch over to this.
And Ryan, quick question. When you talk about it being kind of risk-gated, is that just to be mindful of your token spend?
No. It's all it is doing what we do in the real world, which is if you're touching code that's really important, you have to be extra careful. I think we're quickly moving into a world where token spend just doesn't matter. Like, the cost of these tokens compared to a human engineer is a fraction of a fraction of a fraction. And yes, not everyone is wealthy and not everybody can afford all the tokens. But I think if you're building real stuff, and the people I'm talking to are anyone who's building real stuff. Like if you're building fun, side project stuff, you're obviously going to care about your tokens. But I'm talking about real engineering, building real companies here. And if that's the case, something like $200 a month for your Codex Pro plan is hilariously cheap. And I still have not hit the limits on that. So that's what I'm talking about. So let me walk you through the mermaid diagram and how this basically works. So the first thing you do is that you create what's called a contract. This is actually a JSON file where you tell your agent, okay, if you touch files in any of these directories, then this is a high-risk PR. We need to say we're in a high-risk situation. If it's not, it's in low, right? So you create that first. And again, your agent creates all this stuff. Just point your agent at my post on X and say, hey, help me set this up. And then work at it for a couple of days until it's set up. So then what you do is you have what's called a policy or drift check. So the problem is, like, as your agent is doing stuff, it's probably updating documentation, whether it's agents.md files or actual, markdown files with plans or other things. And you need to make sure that your policy, your documentation isn't drifting. So you do a quick check on that. And again, this is a GitHub action, right? So it happens programmatically. And then you open the PR, right? And usually that's your agent opening the PR. Mine's called Scout. So Scout opens up the PR. Gate runs, right? So it checks the contract and checks if this is a high-risk PR. And if it is, then you go down this high-risk path, right? So a practical example of this is if you have a login path, right? So the way that people log into your app is very important. It can't break. Anything you touch in that login, path should be marked as high risk, right? And if so, then there's always going to be human reviewer required. There's going to be some extra continuous integration checks that we do. Okay, then we run that risk policy gate. So the idea is, do all the CI checks pass? And if they do, then you continue down this path. We do a security scan, and then eventually it's merge ready. So if we go back to this, you've got a couple files. So like this is the contract file, right? Where you're saying anything in your legal chat or your tools or your schema is high risk. Everything else is low risk. And then you've got your merge policy. So you've got these required checks on high. On your low, you only have 2 checks on that.
The dimensions in that schema, would you ever define certain required checks are linked to certain modules or areas of your code base? Or right now, is it even more simple than that?
So in your package.json file, you actually have a bunch of NPM scripts. So you could see here, for instance, you've got harness, UI, capture browser evidence. And these are programmatic TypeScript checks that basically run. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to take things out of your agents.md files that are non-deterministic, like, hey, make sure to check, right? Whereas instead you just use GitHub actions, and NPM scripts, which are programmatic and deterministic. So that's basically it. It's not really rocket science. I think what they need to do is realize that this is the system they need to build. You need a deterministic loop whenever a PR is created. And you want that deterministic loop to check that there's no documentation drift. You want to determine if what you're doing is high risk. If so, you want to run extra CI checks. And then you want this thing to loop using GitHub Actions. And included in that is a grep review or a CodeRabbit review or a Codex review or whatever your review tool is. You run the review, you see if it found anything, and then you remediate, you fix it, and then you loop again, right? So, and then eventually you get out a green CI checked PR that you can check. And the reason why we didn't used to do this as strictly is because it was really expensive and hard for humans to do all these things. And it was kind of a grind, to make sure all these CI checks were green and you were fixing everything. But the truth is you just have these agents now that run in loops and it doesn't really matter.
We all love writing test cases, don't we?
So now that we've got those things going, we just set up these loops. And the Ralph Wiggum loop is usually a part of the feature development cycle in here, right? So usually you'd have a Ralph loop before this that would create the PR, right? So you would define the feature that you want to build. You'd go through a detailed PRD creation step. You'd create all the user stories with clear, measurable outcomes, and then you would then run the loop on that, and then you would arrive at a PR. And so this code factory really starts once the PR is created, but you could actually start it earlier when you want to create the actual PR.
Okay, and when you mentioned the drift between, say, documentation and code, do you see code no longer being the source of truth, or do you think it's a bit of both?
I think actually you want as little documentation as possible. The truth should be the code. The documentation is only to help the agent do things that the code can't explain, or it's really a signpost system. So, for instance, in my top level agents.md file, it mostly is a pointer to the other agent MD files that matter, or to the documentation that matters, and then skills are used this way as well. I think skills are becoming very important. So you want to make sure that your skills only contain things that your package.json can't do. So I think that's an important thing, is have as little documentation as possible, but make sure it doesn't drift.
And in terms of you kind of, churning on this and eventually creating this kind of framework of Code Factory, where did you find this kind of self-healing PR really made sense? Where was the first kind of breakthrough moment you had?
I think, all of us are realizing this. You're sort of sitting there and you're like, well, why wouldn't the agent just fix anything it finds in the PR? Why is it waiting on me to do that? And so I think whenever you find that you are the blocking point in a process, then you have to think, well, how can I automate the loop so the agent can do that? And this is where I think we're eventually going to move from code factories to company factories, right? Where more and more of your processes are agents running in a loop. And then you're coming in at key moments to sign things off. It's a lot like running a company. I mean, instead of employees, you have agents. You have to specify things well for these agents, just like you do with employees. You have to give them feedback, just like employees. You have to check their work. I think people that are good engineering managers are going to do very well in the world of company factories and code factories. And that's why we're going to see a lot of 1, 2, 3, 4-person companies. I'm just launching a startup. Just closed my seed round. I won't be hiring an engineer right away because I'm doing it all. And it's important that I do it all right now because it's going to force me to create those loops, right? So as I hire, I'll just put people in charge of these agent loops. So we'll go from there.
Yeah. And I think one of the benefits of kind of automating a lot of tasks, and it obviously starts with the low leverage tasks, is that you don't kind of get the drift that you do when you're managing people. Whereas with humans over time, there's kind of potentially a drift away from those expectations.
I think both agents and humans drift unless there's a manager that's ensuring they don't. It's just natural, right? I'm sure we've all been hired at a company and been told, the company wiki is here, or the Notion is over here, and you kind of read it a bit and you're like, some of this is out of date, and you just stop reading it, right? So that's because, the humans created the documentation and let it drift. But what's cool, so one of my processes is I have a daily loop that checks for documentation drift, right? So it's a cron job that runs, in a repo and basically looks for anything that seems misaligned and then, fixes it and then sends me a report. That's going to be pretty common.
Out of interest, are you just running that locally on your machine or using say, that Codex Mac app?
Yeah, so I'm using Codex CLI mostly. New Mac app is great, but I feel like I'm a little faster in the CLI. So I'll show my screen. So what you're seeing here is 3 ghosty windows, and you've got 3 checkouts, right? So I've got basically my third checkout over here. So this is so we'll start up Codex there. I've got checkout 1, checkout 2, and checkout 3. I've actually got these 3 little panes down here that tell me which local repo I'm in, whether it's 1, 2, or 3.
Oh, nice.
I'm actually working on migrating my domain at the moment, so that's what this project is. This is a large UI refresh that I'm doing, and this is typically main where I do hot fixes. And then occasionally what I'll do is I'll have a VS Code instance running where I can click around and look at things. Just visually, that kind of helps me. And so usually this is actually over here. So that's a little bit how I run my setup.
On the 3 ghosty windows with the untangled annotation at the bottom, it's really neat. Embarrassingly, I actually once have stuck sticky tapes on my screen.
I mean, whatever works, it's like you kind of forget like which repo am I working in here? And so Figlet is what I use, which is kind of fun to do that. But we're all learning these tips and tricks. It's like I run 3 dev servers, on those 3 local checkouts. I don't use Git work trees because that's just like extra mental overhead for me. I can understand in this folder, is this checkout on this branch, right?
Yeah. It seems like people are pretty much split 50-50 on whether to use Git work trees or not.
Yeah. But now I want to back up and say all this stuff, Code Factory, 3 checkouts, blah, blah, blah. We're in a weird temporary state where, I think probably in 12 months max, OpenAI, Anthropic, and then some agent labs are going to solve this, right?
Yeah.
The machinery around building with agents, right? And that includes things like how do you auth your agent? Does it have its own GitHub account? Does it have its own Vercel account? There's a lot of stuff that's just we're so early that's very kludgy right now. And I'm pretty sure this is all going to be solved, but I don't have time to wait 12 months. I've got a company to build. We've got a lot of stuff to ship. So my Code Factory is my answer to that until then. But I can't wait for some of this stuff to be done by just the Codex Mac app, like where it will just do all this for me. But we're not there yet.
Yeah, I think we'll look back at this moment with nostalgia, almost as if, the days of the dial-up modems for the internet.
Probably. And GitHub itself was made for a different time, pre-agents, and they're starting to do stuff. But even, that is just wildly not appropriate for the way we're all building right now.
Going back to Code Factory, I was interested, are there any kind of shortcomings that you found to date where, maybe you'd need to step in a bit more than you need to? Obviously, there is still like human in the loop or on the loop, and you do need to carefully manage things so you don't get slop. Where does Code Factory fall short currently in your workflow? What does it not really?
I think front end is still really hard. I find that most front end tasks are just very much pair programming with the agent. It really doesn't work very well. You're trying to get the agent to truly see what's happening. And you can use things like Agent Browser and Agentation, and these things help, but it's still really kludgy. And then you submit a PR for that thing. And then, if your PR check step finds anything, like revalidating the UI is just hard. Like it kind of works. So in my Code Factory setup, it actually records a screencast of the agent checking its work and it puts it in the PR. And that sounds great, but it's really fragile. Like it breaks all the time. So, It's not some silver bullet that just magically works and I, wake up and all my work is done and I just click buttons and go have, a cocktail. So the real world is way messier, but it's better than the way we used to do things.
Things are changing fast.
We click a lot less buttons and we write a lot less code than we used to.
Okay, so Ryan, anything else that you wanted to mention about Code Factory? Any kind of tips for listeners in terms of implementing their workflow besides just copying, pasting into the agent and getting set up?
Just because we have agents now doesn't mean you don't have to do the work and it's not going to be frustrating. Grab the article off X, read it, and then have your agent point at it, and then spend 1 to 2 days getting your Terraform, your repo to get it Code Factory ready. That small investment will pay huge dividends over the coming year or two. Don't be afraid if you aren't some experienced DevOps person like I'm not. Just talk to your agent a lot, learn a lot, ask about all these things. What is a contract and how does this GitHub action work? And then you'll learn a lot and then you'll be ahead of everybody. I would say like the people using agents right now to build are some tiny percent of 1% of the world, right? And now the people that are terraforming their repos to make them Code Factory ready are some tiny percentage of that tiny percentage, right? So you're going to be in a good spot if you're even listening to this podcast and trying these things, but do the work.
And Ryan, to wrap, so what are 3 bits of advice you'd give to someone, actually trying to get a startup off the ground or build in public besides what you've just mentioned?
I think find a vertical problem to solve that's pretty niche. You do not want the model, labs coming after your problem. So I would pick a specific problem to solve that is a real pain point, Don't pick vitamin pills, pick pain pills. So that's kind of thing one. Thing two is get it built, get it in public. Try to get real users, right? Get some feedback. And then thirdly, just move as fast as you can. It's a pretty scary time to build. The moats are very, very thin, if at all, existing. And we're all in that spot. So hang in there.
It feels equally exciting as well as like, oh my word, what is going on?
Yeah, it's both.
Ryan, anything else you'd like to mention before we wrap? Obviously, it's been amazing having you on today.
No, just to follow me on X. It's just Ryan Carson. That's where I'm active all day, every day. Say hello. Let me know if you're doing something cool, and I'll check it out. Thanks for having the show, and excited to share this with everybody out.
I saw that you're looking for maintainers on your repo.
Just post an issue to say you're interested in being a maintainer. I'd love some maintainers to help me take over Ant Farm and the Ralph repo. I've got to focus on my startup.
Okay. Congrats again for getting your startup off the ground, your raise. Now, as you mentioned, you're now a 4-time founder, so that's exciting.
Yeah, 4 times around the block, man. I'm here for some more pain. But thanks. Good to see you, and we'll chat soon.